Yeah, the spirit mind training is so interesting to me because before I already had this very detailed model of how the world works. I had a lot of experience doing energy work and teaching energy work and practicing and and then when I met Hisami and I moved to Tokyo, I was still teaching classes here, and she would come to my classes and she would say things like, "Oh, that part isn't really doing anything, right?" And I was like, "What?" Or she'd say, I was teaching, people here really wanted to learn how to channel. I used to teach channeling classes. I don't actually teach that anymore because I think after all those years of learning to channel and teaching it, the final answer was just be yourself. Right? So channel yourself. So I was like, okay, that was a long journey to get back to, a lot of learning how to do something to learn not to do it. And so I'm in the channeling class and I'm teaching people and they're practicing and it's at the beginning it's a lot of wishful thinking and a little bit of reality. And then over time that sort of switches towards a lot of reality and the wishful thinking goes away. But you have to I don't know any way to get through that other than to go through it. So I would validate my students where they are and kind of keep them going on the journey. And and that's the case where my wife Hisami said, they're not really channeling anything, right? And I was like, yeah, just don't tell them yet. They'll get there. Give them a little time. And so it became clear really early on that as much as I can see and tune into, she can see all of that and even more. And so I started asking her, where did you train or where did you learn? She's like, oh, I didn't train anywhere. I don't do any kind of meditation. I've never taken a spiritual class. I'm like, okay. So, okay, great. Okay, got it. and and so he said, okay, how do we start taking the stuff that she's been sharing in Japan? Can we put it together into a program that people can take? How do we take this sort of wordless all-knowingness and help people shift into that space themselves? And so I got an interpreter and I showed up to one of her classes and was completely blown away. Like, wow, this is, in some sense, the simplest teaching ever, which makes it the hardest thing to do. It's like we want to have a bunch of steps, but it's really not required. And so this course, Awakening Your Spirit Mind, is kind of about stripping away all that needless stuff and really boiling spirituality down to its true essence. So, which is just about remembering who you truly are, learning to be in that space, and then learning to bring the rest of you, your analyzer, and bring it into that space as well. So it's about taking these two minds, these two parts of self, and then integrating them rather than figuring out, like I said, which one to use, which one's better or worse, or and so on. Like saying, how do I have them both together? And the experience for me of going through this is that uh, life for me got much simpler. So even though I knew lots of techniques for manifesting things and creating things, I realized that 90% of that stuff that I'm doing can happen without me doing it. It's like one way she described it, she said, watching me manifest, I'm definitely manifesting really well, but I'm sort of going like this in a spiral, and she said, you can just go straight. Like if you're really tuning in and listening, there's a road that just goes straight to where you want to go and beyond. It's not even where I want to go. It's like a straight to where there's a road that's taking your spirit on a journey naturally. It's probably the wanting that's making me do this, right? I want to go over there. Oh, I realize that's not where I wanted. Okay, how about over here? Okay, how about over here? Right? Round and around. And although that journey is very fun, and uh, and we each kind of enjoy the dramas that we create in our journey. That's just kind of the fun part of life. There is a simpler way. So if you're starting to notice the bigger patterns, like I was, if you're watching this and you're starting to notice that I've been to a lot of workshops and I've got a lot of moments that are really exciting. And I think, everything's going to change. And then I go home, and then a few months later, I'm sort of back to the same spot. And then I go to a new workshop and I get excited and, everything feels like it's going to change. And then a little bit later, a few months later, kind of come back and I'm in the same spot. So if you've noticed that, or maybe your spot's moving, but you're noticing, there's a lot of action or a lot of promise that's sort of enthusiasm that's not turning into, sort of a permanent change, then you'll probably love this program, because this program, Awakening Your Spirit Mind, is about how do you make that shift? How do you make a shift off of this sort of spiral road that's moving in the general direction, but taking up a lot of time and energy, and that maybe you could just be hanging out with your loved ones or enjoying yourself. Maybe you could, I'm playing guitar now, which is really fun. I've got time to do things that are just about joy. It's not all about work or trying to accomplish or become somebody. Things kind of get really simple. So it's a little hard to put into words, but that's kind of, for me, that's been my experience with the Spirit Mind journey. And in the training, that's what I share. The teaching itself comes from my wife, but she doesn't speak English, like I mentioned. So it's all in we have these beautiful videos and some animations, and there's no, she's not like talking like this. And then me, my part is just sharing my journey. Here's what I thought I learned when I watched this video. And then here's what I actually learned, like a few weeks later or a few years later, or 5 years later. Here's what I realized, because there's just, when you tune into really deep spiritual truths, there's layers and layers of information, depending on how much you can let go of your beliefs. And so that's my journey. Is I'm sort of the navigator, helping people like me, analytical people, kind of like let that go and sort of get back into the space where you're just, life is flowing without quite so much effort.